The Shadow of Shortage, December 8, 1941. Dawn breaks over the smoldering ruins of Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The acrid smoke hangs thick in the air, mingling with the salty temps of the Pacific. Alarms blare as sailors scramble across decks slick with oil and blood, their boots pounding against metal that echoes like thunder. In the chaos, a young mechanic named Private Harlan Hank Reeves kneels beside a jeep, his hands blackened from frantic repairs. The tires, those unassuming black rings of rubber, are already showing cracks from overuse. A silent warning amid the roar of engines revving to life. But no one yet grasps the true horror unfolding across the ocean. Japan's forces surging through Southeast Asia, severing the lifeline of natural rubber that powers America's war machine. You can almost hear the distant rumble of tanks grinding to a halt. Convoys stalled in mud without fresh treads to grip the earth. In those first frantic hours after the attack, the world shifts on its axis. Rubber isn't just a commodity, it's the pulse of mobility. Tires for trucks hauling ammunition across deserts. 4 jeeps dodging artillery in Europe. For endless convoys snaking through supply lines that stretch from factories in Detroit to battlefields in Normandy. Without it, victory slips away like sand through clenched fists. In Washington, D.C., urgency electrifies the corridors of power. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's advisors huddle in smoke-filled rooms. Maps sprawled across tables marked with red lines, slicing through Malaya and the Dutch East Indies home to 90% of the world's natural rubber. Japan's invasion isn't just territorial, it's a calculated strangulation. By February 1942, the U.S. stockpile dwindles to a mere 660,000 tons, barely enough for a year's civilian needs, let alone a global war. Rationing hits hard. Civilians scrape by on retreads. Speed limits drop to 35 miles per hour to conserve treads, and scrap drives turn neighborhoods into salvage yards. Boy Scouts haul old garden hoses and rain boots to collection points, while housewives surrender their rubber mats. But it's a bandage on a gaping wound. Enter the Rubber Reserve Company, a wartime entity born from desperation. Under the War Production Board, led better known in sense, Donald M. Nelson. It mobilizes industry titans: Goodyear, Firestone, B.F. Goodrich, U.S. Rubber. These aren't just companies, they're arsenals of innovation. They're factories in Akron, Ohio, the rubber capital of the world, pulsing with the hum of machinery and the sharp scent of chemicals. But natural rubber, harvested from Hevea brasiliensis trees in distant jungles, can't be conjured overnight. The solution: synthetic rubber, a lab-born miracle whispered about in chemical circles for decades, but never scaled to save a nation. At the heart of this storm stands Waldo Longsbury Sr., a 43-year-old chemist at B.F. Goodrich, his wire-rimmed glasses fogging from the heat of Bunsen burners in his cluttered lab. Born in 1898 in Demopolis, Alabama, Semon's journey to this moment is one of relentless curiosity. A University of Washington Ph.D. In 1926, he joins Goodrich amid the Great Depression, tinkering with polymers when others chase safer bets. By the late 1930s, he's already revolutionized vinyl with plastic, turning brittle PVC into flexible corrosite in everything from shower curtains to wire insulation. But tires demand more: resilience under fire, grip on slick roads, endurance for convoys that never stop. Semon's lab becomes a battlefield of its own. Beakers bubble with monomer-styrene from coal tar, butadiene from petroleum mixed in precise. The air reeks of sulfur and solvents, a caustic brew that stings the eyes. Colleagues like Ray P. Dinsmore at Goodyear and John Street at Firestone exchange frantic telegrams, sharing data in a rare spirit of cooperation mandated by the government. No patents, hoard secrets. Now, the enemy is time. Semony pores over German patents on Bunes, smuggled through neutral channels, adapting their butadiene-styrene copolymer for American needs. Natural rubbers, molecular chains long, tangled isoprene units, give it elasticity. Synthetic must mimic that, but better, resistant to oil, heat, and the brutal wear of war. Days blur into nights. Simeon tests, batch after batch, vulcanizing samples with sulfur, adding carbon black for strength, accelerators like mercaptobenzosol to speed curing. One formula cracks under cold, another swells in gasoline. But persistence yields glimpses of promise. In 1940, he unveils a Maripol American polymer A butadiene-based rubber. That's cheaper, tougher. It's not perfect. Early versions were faster than natural, but it's a start. As Pearl Harbor's shockwaves ripple, Siemens' team scales up, building pilot plants where massive reactors churn. Emulsions like frothy milk. Yet, doubts linger. Can this lab-born substance truly replace nature's gift? In Akron's test tracks, prototype tires screech around corners, engineers measuring tread depth with calipers, noting every groove etched by gravel. The results are mixed, good enough for trucks, but will they hold under the weight of Sherman tanks rumbling across Sicilian hills? The government pours in $700 million, rivaling the Manhattan Project's budget, constructing 51 plants across the U.S. from Institute, West Virginia, to Borgare, Texas. Smokestacks. Belches butadiene flows from oil refineries. By mid-1942, production creeps upward, 2,000 tons a month, then 10,000. But the convoys wait. Tires ration to essentials. In North Africa, General Dwight Don Eisenhower's forces improvise with canvas wraps and metal rims, vehicles bogging down in sand. The crisis peaks. Without synthetic rubber, the Allied advance grinds to a halt. Samin, sleeves rolled up, stares at his latest formula. A 75-25 butadiene-styrene mix, echoing the GR's standard agreed upon in March. It's close elastic, durable, but one impurity, one miscalculation. And it all unravels. As the sun sets over Akron's industrial skyline, Semin lights another cigarette, the flame illuminating scribbled notes. Tomorrow brings another test. Will this be the breakthrough that turns the tide, or will the shadow of shortage swallow the war effort whole? The breakthrough under pressure, late spring, 1942. Akron, Ohio. The midnight shift at B.F. Goodrich's plant for never really ends. It just bleeds into the next. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead, casting harsh shadows across rows of gleaming autoclaves and mixing kettles the size of small houses. The air is heavy with the sweet-sour bite of styrene and the oily perfume of butadiene. Somewhere a valve hisses, a conveyor rattles, and in the middle of it all stands Waldo Semian, coat off, tie loosened, sleeves rolled to the elbows, staring at a small black disc of vulcanized compound resting on a lab bench. This is no ordinary sample. T's. One didn't T. Crack when flexed at -20 degrees. T1 didn't T balloon. When soaked in aviation fuel. This one bounced wind dropped from waist height onto concrete. The technicians around him are quiet, almost reverent. They've seen hundreds of failures. They know what failure smells like. Burnt rubber and disappointment. Tonight smells different. Seminy picks up the disc, turns it slowly in his calloused fingers. The surface is matte, almost velvety under the light, flecked with carbon black that gives it the deep, familiar blackness of a real tire. He presses his thumbnail into the edge. It resists, then yields just enough, exactly the way natural rubber would. A small, tired smile flickers across his face. He doesn't celebrate. There's no time for that. Es simple seis. Run it on the drum. The test drum is a brutal machine. A wide steel cylinder studded with cleats and rocks, spinning at highway speed while a tire carcass presses against it. Every revolution grinds away tread, simulates months of abuse in minutes. The technicians mount the new compound onto a 6-ply truck tire carcass. Nothing fancy, just a standard 7.50 20 military Cezanne. Lowered onto the drum. The motor winds to life. The room fills with the low growl of rubber meeting metal. They watch in silence. 5,000 miles simulated. 10,000. 15. The compound begins to wear, but evenly, no chunking. No cracking at the shoulders. No heat blistering. At 25,000 simulated miles, the sidewalls are still supple, the tread still showing measurable depth. Someone lets out a low whistle. Another mutters, "Jesus, it's actually holding." Semen doesn't speak. He's already calculating in his head. Polymerization temperature, catalyst concentration, emulsifier ratio, chain transfer agent. Every variable that went into this batch. He knows the recipe is close. 75% butadiene, 25% styrene. Polymerized in a soap emulsion at 50 degrees Celsius with potassium persulfate initiator and a mercaptan modifier to control molecular weight. It's not glamorous chemistry. It's industrial chemistry at war speed. But tonight, it works. By dawn, the data is on paper. Abrasion resistance 92% of natural rubber hevia. Tensile strength 2800 psi. Elongation at break 620%. Not perfect. Not perfect, but good enough. Good enough that the War Production Board's Technical Committee, meeting that same week in Washington, votes unanimously to standardize it as government rubbers. The baseline formula every synthetic rubber plant in the country will now chase. Word spreads fast. In Detroit, Ford and Chrysler engineers receive telegrams ordering them to retool tire molds for the new compound. In the Gulf Coast, oil refineries ramp up butadiene production, cracking petroleum fractions at high temperature, separating the 4-carbon gas through refrigeration and distillation columns that stretch for city blocks. In West Virginia, the massive government-owned plant at Institute begins its first full-scale run. The reactor vessels, each one 3 stories tall, glow faintly red at night from the heat inside. But success breeds new pressure. The chemists now face an impossible deadline. The Army needs 30,000 tons of finished synthetic rubber by the end of 1943, just to keep existing convoys rolling. The Navy wants another 15,000 tons for landing craft and aircraft tires. And everyone knows the real number is much higher because losses in North Africa and the Pacific are chewing through tires faster than anyone predicted. A single M4 Sherman tank rolling across rocky Sicilian terrain can wear out a set of tracks in under 200 miles. Multiply that by thousands of vehicles, and the math becomes terrifying. Semen's team works in shifts that blur into weeks. They sleep on cots in the lab basement. They eat sandwiches at their benches. When one batch fills too much gel, too little elasticities, they don't curse. They just clean the reactor and start again. Small improvements stack. Better emulsifiers. Reduce foaming. Higher butadiene purity cuts odor and improves consistency. New accelerators shave curing time from hours to minutes. Every tweak matters when you're trying to feed an army on the move. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the first convoys are already feeling the difference. In England, American truck drivers notice their new tires grip better in rain than the old retreads ever did. In the Libyan desert, British 8's Army mechanics mount GR's tires on Matilda tanks and watch them claw through sand. Without the sidewall collapse that plagued natural rubber compounds in extreme heat, the reports filter back to Washington in terse cables. Synthetic performance satisfactory. Recommend accelerated production. Yet the chemists know the war isn't won on test drums. In the Pacific, Marines on Guadalcanal are still running on whatever rubber they can scavenge natural stockpiles. Capture Japanese Buna. Even bicycle tires, cut and spliced onto Jeep rims. Every truck that makes it to the front line with fresh synthetic tires is one more Jeep that can haul 105 millimeters. Howitzer shells up jungle trails. One more ambulance that can evacuate wounded before the next Japanese counter. Bike in Akron Samin stands at the window of the lab, looking out over the darkened city. Searchlights sweep the sky, hunting for phantom bombers that never come. Somewhere out there, a convoy is moving through the night, headlights dimmed, engines muffled, tires humming over asphalt and gravel and blood-soaked earth. He turns back to the bench. Another sample waits, still warm from the press. It picks it up, feels its weight, its give. They're close. But close isn't enough when entire divisions hang on the difference between a tire that lasts and one that blows out at 60 miles an hour with a 2.5-ton truck full of ammunition behind it. The phone on the wall rings sharp. Insistent Semen answers. A voice from Washington, clipped and urgent. They need the formula locked down. Now. Every plant in the country is waiting for the final specification. Seaman looks at the clock, 3:47 a.m. He exhales slowly, then he says the only thing left to say, "We're ready." The convoys that never stopped summer, 1943. Somewhere on the Red Bull Highway, northern France, dust hangs in the air like brown fog, kicked up by thousands of tires chewing the crushed stone surface. The road really just two muddy lanes, hastily bulldozed through hedgerow arrows straight toward the front. Engines roar in low gear. Radiators hiss, drivers' eyes red from 48 hours without sleep. Grip steering wheels slick with sweat. In the cab of a Dusanda Hef, GMCCCKW, Sergeant Eddie Buck Malone shifts down, feels the truck lurch as the load of 105mm shells settles against the tailgate. The tires beneath him brand new, 6 of them, black as midnighter, not the familiar grayish and natural rubber compounds. He ran on in Sicily. These are matte, almost oily looking, born in American reactors rather than Malayan groves. They hum a different note against the road, a slightly higher, more metallic whine. Buck notices the difference in his bones. Less Cybele flex, less heat buildup, climbing the long grades outside St. Lane. He doesn't know the chemist's name. Doesn't know Waldo Samine ever existed. All he knows is that 3 months earlier his platoon lost 2 trucks in 24 hours. Tires blew at speed. Rims gouged the road. Ammunition cooked off in the wreckage. Men burned alive. Now those same trucks roll again. The new tires hold. They grip. They don't quit. Across the European theater, the same quiet miracle repeats itself. In the bocage of Normandy, Jeep drivers thread narrow sunken lanes, dodging Teller mines and 88mm fire. The synthetic sidewalls shrugged off the sharp limestone edges that once sliced natural rubber open like paper. In the Vosges Mountains, 6x6s, claw-up switchbacks coated in freezing rain. The new compound stays pliable at 0 degrees where the old stuff turned brittle and cracked. On the narrow-gauge railheads feeding Patton's Third Army, trailers stacked with jerry cans and ration crates roll behind prime movers whose tires no longer delaminate under the torque of 200 horsepower engines. The numbers tell a colder story. By September 1943, GRS production crosses 30,000 long tons per month, more than the entire pre-war natural rubber import of the United States. 51 government plants, built in under 18 months, now churn day and night. Butadiene flows from Humble Oil in Baytown, Texas. Styrene from Dow in Midland, Michigan. Carbon black from Colombian carbon in Texas and Louisiana. The emulsion polymerization vats never cool. Each 40,000-gallon reactor yields roughly 10 tons of raw polymer every 48 hours. Coagulated, dried, baled, shipped. The pipeline is alive. Logisticians in the rear echelons begin to breathe again. The tire famine that haunted staff maps in 1942 has receded. Replacements arrive in theater faster than losses can eat them. The famous Red Bull Express, that improvised lifeline of 6,000 trucks. Running 24 hours a day becomes possible only because the tires keep turning. Drivers push 300 to 400 miles a day, sleeping in cabs, eating cold cereal. The trucks never wait for retreads. They never limp back on rims. They simply keep going. The Germans notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports begin mentioning the sudden resilience of American motor transport. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, STF officers, puzzle over aerial photographs. Endless columns that should have bogged down in autumn mud but instead surge forward. They cannot know that the black rings beneath those trucks are not high-via latex, but molecules stitched together in Akron and Institute and Bor. They only know the convoys do not stop. Yet the synthetic tires are not flawless. In extreme cold Ardennes, December 1944, they stiffen more than natural rubber, reducing traction on ice. In deep Santonesia, Sicily, they heat up faster and shed tread blocks sooner. Engineers at the rubber testing laboratory in Fort Eustis, Virginia, log every failure, every blowout report, every tread depth measurement returned from overseas. Adjustments follow quickly. Higher styrene content for better abrasion in hot climates, more plasticizer for cold flexibility, improved carbon black dispersion to fight Each change ripples back through the production chain. Plants receive teletype updates. Batch recipes shift overnight. Semine, now a quiet legend among the chemists, rarely leaves Akron. He walks the factory floors at night when the shifts change, watching the massive Banbury mixers knead the black dough, listening to the rhythmic thump of calendar rolls, squeezing rubber into sheets 2 stories wide. He knows every weak link. Too much soap in the emulsion leaves residue that weakens adhesion to the cord body. Too little modifier lets chains grow too long and the compound turns leathery. He carries those numbers in his head the way a combat infantryman carries his rifle serial number. One evening in late 1943, he receives a small package from the European theater. Inside, a section of blown tire carcass, the sidewall torn open in a jagged smile, still smelling faintly of cordite and diesel. Attached is a handwritten note from an ordnance officer in Patton's army. These held 1,800 miles under 10 tons of ammo before they gave up. The boys are calling them Seaman's shoes. Keep sending them. Seaman reads the note twice, folds it carefully, places it in his desk drawer beside the early Ameripol samples he still keeps as talismans. Outside, the factory whistles blow. Another shift begins. Another reactor is charged. Another convoy will roll tomorrow. But the Germans are not finished. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, a new offensive is gathering, tanks massing, artillery registering, plans drawn in candlelit bunkers. The weather is turning brutal. Snow is coming. Ice is coming, and the convoys will have to keep moving through it all. On a freezing morning in December 1944, Sergeant Buck Malone climbs back into his cab, kicks the starter, feels the big GMC shudder to life. The tires beneath him fresh GRs retreads this time crunch into the snow-dusted gravel. He doesn't know it yet, but the next 6 weeks will be the hardest test the synthetic tires have ever faced. The winter that tried to break them, December 16th, 1944. "5:30 hours. The Ardennes forest, eastern Belgium. Snow falls in heavy, wet flakes that cling to pine needles and tank barrels alike. The temperature hovers at -12 Celsius, and the wind cuts through canvas truck, covers like a bayonet. Visibility is down to 50 meters. No one hears the first German artillery until the shells are already falling. Inside the cab of a 2.5-ton GMC, Sergeant Buck Malone jams the clutch, downshifts and guns the engine. The truck lurches forward, tires clawing at the frozen ruts. Behind him stretches a mile-long column of the 793rd Quartermaster Truck Company dodges Studebakers, everyone loaded with ammunition, medical supplies, or replacement parts, desperately needed by the units now fighting for their lives against the surprise German thrust. The Battle of the Bulge has begun. The tires beneath Buck's truck are fresh GR's retreads, mounted just 3 days earlier at a forward ordnance depot near Liege. They're blacker than the night, flecked with the same carbon black that has become as vital as gunpowder. The compound has been tweaked again, more naphthenic oil, added as a low-temperature plastic, slightly higher butadiene ratio to keep the rubber from turning glass hard in the cold. Ordnance officers had argued over the change for weeks. Some wanted to stick with the original 75/25 formula. Seaman's team pushed the adjustment through on the strength of cold-room test data from Akron. In the real war, those numbers are being tested for blood. The column crawls. Engines overheat, despite the cold. Radiators clog with ice. Drivers light small fires under oil pans to thaw frozen fuel lines. But those tires keep turning. At a sharp uphill bend near Bastogne, a driver ahead of Buck loses traction on glare ice. His natural rubber retreads, salvaged from an older batch, spin uselessly. The truck sliding sideways until the rear wheels drop into a ditch. The load shifts. Ammo crates tumble. The driver guns it again, nothing. The tires simply will not bite. Buck's truck reaches the same patch. He feels the back end start to drift. The familiar sickening slide. He eases off the throttle, lets the engine torque pull the truck through instead of fighting it. The GR's compound flexes just enough, the tread blocks digging microscopic edges into the ice. The truck surges forward, clearing the ice patch by inches. Behind him, 3 more trucks follow the same path, each one making it where the older tires failed. Word spreads up and down the line in the only way it can in combat. Shouted over idling engines, passed hand to hand with cigarettes and curses. The black ones grip, the old gray ones don't. No one mentions chemists or polymerization or acronym. Just know the new tires are saving their lives. The Germans had counted on the weather to paralyze American motor transport. Their own vehicles, many still running on dwindling stocks of captured natural rubber or inferior Buna, struggle in the cold. Tracks throw links, tires split, engine seize. The Wehrmacht columns slow, then stall. The American convoys, by contrast, keep crawling forward 10 miles a day, then 15, then 20. The Red Bull Express pivots north, feeding Bassadon-Saint-Vith. The northern shoulder. Every mile is paid for in frozen fingers, frostbitten toes, and blown engine sput. The tires do not quit. Reports flood back to the rubber branch in Washington. Ordnance officers in the field send cables that read like battlefield dispatches. GR's retreads, superior in extreme cold. Sidewall, cracking minimal. Traction noticeably better than natural on ice. Impact snow. Recommend immediate increase in low-temp plasticizer across all production. In Akron, the plants receive the message at 030 hours local time. Within 48 hours, revised recipes are wired to every government facility. Production lines shift. The extra naphthenic oil arrives by rail from Texas refineries. Mixing kettles are adjusted. No fanfare. No speeches, just the relentless churn of American industry at war. By January 1945, the tide has turned. The German offensive collapses under fuel shortages, air attacks, and the simple fact that their armor cannot move while the American supply lines fed by those black tires refuse to break. Patton's Third Army sweeps south to relieve Hodge's First Army hammers from the north. The bulge is pinched off. In the aftermath, a young ordnance lieutenant named Thomas Carver walks a salvage yard near Hub. Rows of shattered vehicles lie half buried in snow. He stops beside a GMC that took a direct hit from an 88. The cab is gone. The engine block is twisted. Before the 6 tires are still inflated, tread worn to the cords, but holding air. Sidewalls intact despite the concussion. The compound is GR's. Carver kneels, runs a gloved hand over the scarred surface, and feels something close to gratitude. Months later, in a quiet office in Washington, Waldo Samine receives a classified folder. Inside, photographs of that same truck, along with a citation from the Quartermaster General. It reads, in part, the performance of government rubber-styrene tires under the extreme conditions of the Ardennes offensive materially contributed to the maintenance of supply lines critical to the Allied victory. Semyon closes the folder. He doesn't frame it. He simply places it beside the note from Patton's army that arrived a year earlier. Then he returns to the lab. The war in Europe is ending, but in the Pacific, another island-hopping campaign is reaching its climax. Okinawa, Iwahuma. The home islands loom. The convoys will have to keep rolling across coral reefs, volcanic ash, and beaches defended to the last man. And the tires will have to keep turning. The final test, Pacific Fire and Ash. March 1945. Iwo Jima. 9:47 hours. The beach is black volcanic sand that clings to everything. Boots, weapons, the canvas covers of supply trucks. The air stinks of cordite, diesel, and burning sulfur. Marines crouch behind the first low dune, faces blackened with soot and fear, while overhead corsairs scream down in long, shallow runs. 500-pound bombs tumbling toward Japanese pillboxes carved into the face of Mount Suribachi. At the water's edge, a line of amphibious DOKWs and LVTs disgorge their loads. Behind them, the first wheeled vehicles nose onto the beach. 6 trucks, jeeps, bulldozers, and the all-important Dunadosaba party. Ton cargo haulers, their tires sink deep into the loose cinders, deeper than any sand they've ever crossed in North Africa or Sicily. The drivers rev engines, rocking the trucks forward, inch by inch. Natural rubber would have overheated and torn here. The sidewalls would have split under the torque and the abrasive pumice. But these tires are GRs. They flex, they grip, they endure. A young corporal named Luis Rivera jumps down from the cab of his GMC, sinks to his ankles in the ash, and checks the pressure gauges mounted on each wheel well. 35 size still holding after the long run from the transport ships. The treads are already packed with black grit, but the blocks remain intact. No chunking, no cracking at the shoulders. He slaps the sidewall like a man reassuring an old horse. Come on, girl. We got work. The work is brutal and unending. Every shell, every case of blood plasma, every crate of M1 ammunition has to be hauled off the beach and up the narrow, twisting trails carved into the volcanic slopes. The Japanese have zeroed every inch of the route with mortar and machine guns. Trucks burn, drivers die, but the convoys keep moving because the tires keep rolling. On the second day, Rivera's truck takes a near miss from an 81mm round. The blast hurls shrapnel across the hood, punctures the canvas, and sends a jagged piece of steel into the right front tire. The hissing is immediate sharp. Angry, Rivera slams the brakes, jumps out, and kneels beside the wound. The puncture is through and through, a ragged tear the size of a fist. By all logic, the tire should be flat already. It isn't. The GR's compound has enough resilience to hold most of the air, even with the sidewall gashed open. He slaps on a combat patch vulcanizing cement, and a heavy rubber plug pumps it back to 30 psi with a hand pump, and climbs back in. The truck moves again. Slowly. Painfully. But it moves. That single moment is repeated hundreds of times across Iwo Jima. Then again on Okinawa. 2 months later, the synthetic tires do not make the Marines invincible. They do not stop bullets or artillery, but they give the logisticians the narrow margin they need. One more trip up the hill. One more load delivered before dark. One more wounded man carried to the aid station instead of bleeding out on the sand. By the summer of 1945, production has reached a staggering 70,000 long tons per month. The United States is no longer scrambling to keep convoys alive. It is drowning the enemy under the sheer volume of material that can now move. The island-hopping campaign accelerates. Airfields sprout on captured atolls faster than the Japanese can reinforce them. B-29s take off from Tinian and Guamon tires, shrugged off the heat of 115-degree runways. And the abrasive coral, dust that once chewed natural rubber to pieces in a matter of days. In the final weeks before the Japanese surrender, a curious reversal takes place. Captured enemy documents and interrogations revealed that the Imperial Army and Navy had their own synthetic Ruber program, Buna, based on stolen German technology. But it never scaled. Fuel shortages crippled their butadiene plants. Quality control was inconsistent. Their tires cracked in the tropics, overheated on long hauls, and failed under combat loads far sooner than the American G. The difference was not chemistry alone. It was organization, raw material access, and relentless iteration. Waldo Semion does not celebrate the surrender on the deck of the Missouri. AE's in Akron watching the last of the wartime reactors go cold as the government begins to shutter excess capacity. The plants built in panic are already being studied for peacetime conversion tires. For Fords and Chevrolets, rubber for refrigerated gaskets, for shoe soles, for garden hoses. The emergency is over, but the legacy remains. In 1946, the Rubber Manufacturers Association quietly compiles a report for Congress. Buried in dry tables and production curves is a single sentence that carries the weight of the entire effort. Without the successful development and mass production of GRS synthetic rubber, the mobility required for the Allied victory in both major theaters of war would have been severely compromised, if not impossible. Semyon keeps a copy of that report in the same desk drawer that holds the note from Patton's army and the photograph of the shut-up GMC on the Ardennes Road. He never frames any of it. He doesn't need to. He knows what those tires carried. Ammunition, medicine, men, hope. Years later, when historians ask him what he remembers most about those frantic years, he does not speak of formulas or reactors or test drums. I remember the sound of trucks moving. They never stopped. And somewhere, in a museum or a scrapyard or under the soil of a dozen battlefields, a few scarred black tires still remain mute witnesses to the quiet miracle that let the convoys roll on when everything else wanted them to stop.